bring in Natasha Sarin, who is a former Deputy Assistant Secretary for Economic Policy at the U.S. Treasury Department, a former counselor to U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. Natasha is the president and co-founder of the Budget Lab at Yale University. She joins us now from New York. Natasha, it's really good to have you. The U.S. Central Bank is supposed to be independent. Donald Trump has repeatedly called Powell too late for not lowering rates since last autumn. That assault now, it seems, going beyond just social media insults. The irony is that the Fed is most likely to cut rates at its next meeting because it believes, or certainly we are led to believe, that the sort of current economic data would warrant that. Is there any merit in Trump's argument and assertion that the Fed should have cut sooner, to your mind?
So there's absolutely no merit. And the reason is something that you just said, Becky, which is the importance of central bank independence and its supremacy. When the Federal Reserve is looking about how it decides to make interest rate decisions, it looks at two things and two things alone. It looks at the state of the labor market and it looks at inflation and inflation in the economy and where the price level is. And in that sense, the Fed has had a bit of a challenging go. You can make arguments in both directions, but because the tariffs that the administration is pursuing are the most inflationary policies we've seen in our lifetimes, that pushes against the rate cuts that you would see when you have a labor market that's cooling, the way that the most recent set of data suggests. And so I think it's a hard call from the Federal Reserve's perspective, but what is definitely not a hard call is that the president or the administration should be nowhere near trying to make instructions or suggestions about where monetary policy should go, because that runs real damaging risks to our economic credibility.
Normally, when a Fed chief stands down, he leaves the job as governor as well. He doesn't have to, he or she, but normally that is the case. That's sort of, what's happened in the past. Do you expect Jerome Powell to sort of disappear from sort of Fed policy making once his term comes to an end? His departure, of course, would leave open the opportunity for a governor who would be more attuned to Donald Trump's position, as it were.
You know, it's hard to make any predictions about what Chair Powell or any members of the board are going to choose to do over the course of the coming months. But one thing I will say with some confidence, because we have historical experience of it here in the United States, and you've seen it in other countries as well, is that when executives start to try and meddle with central bank independence, that comes at real costs. And in the US, that happened during the Nixon administration, where a bunch of pressure was put on Fed Chair Arthur Burns to lower interest rates ahead of an election, and interest rates were lowered, but then we had inflation jump from 3 to 13% over 2 years. So I just think that if the objective is to try to have a stable economy that is the envy of the world, I think going in the direction of trying to make instructions for the Open Markets Committee about what the interest rate trajectory should be really pushes against that objective and is ultimately incredibly counterproductive.
Yeah, you would expect that people would understand that, but clearly it doesn't seem to be the case. The European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde, talking of the importance of independence for all central banks, she says it should not even be debated. There does seem to be some stress on the US labour market at present, job numbers being revised downwards. How resilient do you believe the US economy is at this point?
You know, one thing that's super interesting is that before this administration and before President Trump came into office, the labor market was incredibly strong, and we were in a position where we hadn't worked our way all the way down from the post-pandemic inflation, but directionally that's where we were going. And what's happened since then over the course of the last many months, it's not that there's been a new financial crisis or a new pandemic. What's happened is that you've been in a situation where we have levied trade wars against allies and adversaries alike, And those trade wars have increased the effective tariff rate in our economy from about 2.5% when President Trump took office to about 18%. And so, what you're seeing, the reason why you're seeing this cooling in the labor market is precisely because business is at a bit of a standstill with respect to how do I even plan for or anticipate what the likely environment is going to be in which I'm going to be importing goods to be able to sell on my shelves. And if the prices of those goods are higher, like my colleagues at the Yale Budget Lab and I estimate, then how many people are going to buy them? And so the economy is cooling precisely because of these tariffs. And so, if the administration wants to see an economy that is strong and resilient, there's sort of a very simple answer to what should be done, and it's something they have full control over. We should be rolling back these tariff levels.
The perspective of Natasha Sarin here on Connect the World. It's good to have you. Thank you very much indeed.